Well, you might be surprised to learn that there are some new developments in a murder mystery that had captivated the nation. It's a while back. Remember 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey when she was found murdered in the basement of her family's home in Boulder, Colorado on Christmas Day? That was in 1996. And now investigators are coming forward saying the grand jury that heard the case did think that someone inside that house was responsible for her death. Fox News learning that 3 years after the murder, the grand jury voted to indict the parents, both Ramseys, of the child beauty queen, but that the district attorney refused to go forward with it, citing a lack of evidence for him to use. And it's hard to believe, but JonBenet would be 22 years old if she were alive today. What are we to make of all of this at this point, 16 years later? Let's bring in our legal panel, Faith Jenkins, a former prosecutor, Chip Merlin, a criminal defense attorney. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Faith,
morning.
Good to see you. Faith, it is really unusual to hear about this, particularly to hear from a grand jury member after the case, because they're usually sworn to secrecy. And let's look at this. This is what one of the jurors told a local paper. I just want to read it so our viewers will know. They were told, "We didn't know who did what, but we felt the adults in the house may have done something that they certainly could have prevented or they could have helped her, and they didn't." And then the prosecutor decides not to bring charges. Right or wrong?
Well, it's very unusual for the state to present evidence to a grand jury, and then after the grand jury votes to indict, they choose not to go forward. Because as a prosecutor, you already know what the evidence is, and it's a part of your job to make a decision. We make decisions all the time. We know the evidence, and we make a decision, and we decide we're not going to present this case to the grand jury because we don't think there's enough evidence to go forward. When you do go forward and you present your evidence in front of a grand jury, it's because you believe that these people you're presenting the evidence against actually committed a crime. Well, here, it looks like the DA did not believe that, but he went to the grand jury anyway. I think that's the wrong thing to do. You don't present evidence in a murder investigation if you do not believe that the people you're trying to indict actually committed the crime.
Generally, you wouldn't trouble or convene that grand jury on the case if you didn't think you had some evidence worth considering for charges. Chip, from a defense attorney's point of view, the statute of limitations doesn't ever end on murder. Patsy Ramsey has passed away. You think anything will happen? Because it's been reported other investigators in that district attorney's office in Boulder disagreed with him.
I don't think so. And this happened a long time ago. And since then, the DNA analysis that's come out shows that there's blood on JonBenet's panties from a third party that nobody's ever been able to identify. It actually shows that the prosecutor made the right choice way back when, rather than going with a hunch. You know, these indictments supposed to be who, what, when, where, how. We really don't know who. And that's the point of this particular case. And the new evidence would seem to exonerate them and actually show the innocence of John Ramsey in this particular case.
Well, let me ask Faith this as a former prosecutor. Faith, why would the district attorney, Alex Hunter, say now that a true bill, as it's called in Colorado, was handed to him to charge the Ramseys? I mean, they couldn't decide, was it both, was it one, was it the other, but he had it in his hand. Is there no ethical obligation for a prosecutor to then bring the case?
Well, the ethical obligation is the truth and justice. And I think that Alex Hunter believed he made the right decision here, which is he didn't have enough evidence. He knew he did not have enough evidence to go forward with the case. But the issue is when you know that, because as a prosecutor, you know the evidence you're presenting to the grand jury in advance. Why even go to the grand jury and present them evidence and risk someone being charged with a very serious crime if you know in advance that you don't have the evidence there? Well, that's the problem that I have with this.
Okay, let me just ask you before.
And back then, and to be fair, back then there was a lot of public pressure that we got to find somebody that's been found guilty of this, and that's the role of the prosecutor, the elected official, the highest elected official. Is there really enough evidence to charge somebody otherwise innocent? Beyond a reasonable doubt, you got to prove that they're guilty, and it took a lot of gumption for that person to turn around and say, no, there's not enough evidence. This would not be fair. We're not going to have railroad justices going through because the community needs to find somebody. We really don't know who did it.
I think he was surprised by the true bill. I think that he put forth the evidence, did not think he would get an indictment, but when he did, he was surprised by it and knew that he couldn't go forward with the case.
Interesting. Great analysis by both of you. Chip and Faith, thank you very much.
Thank you.
John?
Thank you.